A millionaire found an orphan boy sleeping in the stable with his prize horses and took him home. Days later, he came home earlier and couldn't believe what the boy was able to do. Lightning split the darkened sky as a teenage boy stumbled through the torrential rain, his thin shirt clinging to his trembling frame. Blood trickled from a gash above his eye, mixing with rainwater and tears. Behind him, angry shouts echoed through the storm, growing fainter as he pushed forward into the unknown darkness. Michael Anderson clutched his side, each breath burning in his lungs as he forced himself to keep moving. The pristine grounds of Harrison Estate loomed before him, its manicured lawns and elegant stables a stark contrast to the hell he'd just escaped. Thunder rolled overhead as another flash of lightning illuminated the stable entrance. Without hesitation, he slipped inside. The sudden warmth and familiar scent of hay enveloped him as his legs finally gave way. He collapsed against one of the stalls, startling the massive black stallion within. The horse's dark eyes studied him intently, but instead of the usual fear Michael felt around such powerful creatures, he sensed something different, almost protective. "I won't hurt you," he whispered, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. "Please, just let me rest here tonight." His fingers trembled as he reached out toward the horse, expecting it to shy away. Instead, the stallion lowered its head, huffing warm breath against his outstretched hand. In the main house overlooking the stables, Charles Harrison stood at his window, unable to sleep. The storm outside matched the turmoil in his heart as he stared at the photo of his late wife, Sarah. 10 years had passed since her suspicious accident, yet the truth still eluded him. A sudden movement near the stables caught his eye, a shadow that shouldn't be there. Charles grabbed his coat and flashlight, driven by an inexplicable urgency. As he approached the stable doors, he heard Thunder, his most volatile stallion, making unusual sounds, not aggressive, but almost gentle. What he discovered inside would change everything. A beaten boy, barely conscious, curled up beside Thunder's stall. The horse that had never allowed anyone near was standing guard over him like a sentinel. As Charles knelt beside the boy, Thunder remained unusually calm. The boy's eyes fluttered open briefly, revealing a hauntingly familiar gaze that stirred something deep in Charles's memory. "Who are you?" he whispered, but the boy had already slipped into unconsciousness, leaving only the sound of rain and thunder to answer his question. If this opening scene has touched your heart, don't let this story end here. Join us on this emotional journey by subscribing to our channel. Every subscription is a chance to experience more powerful stories that will move your soul and inspire your heart. Charles Harrison stood at his office window, his reflection ghosting against the rain-streaked glass. At 52, he cut an impressive figure, tall and distinguished, with silver threading through his dark hair and deep lines etched around his steel blue eyes that spoke of both laughter and loss. The Harrison estate, sprawling over 200 acres of Kentucky's finest horse country, was the culmination of 3 generations of careful breeding and business acumen. But success had come at a devastating price. 10 years ago, his wife Sarah's death had left a void that neither wealth nor achievement could fill. She had died in what police ruled a tragic car accident, her vehicle careening off a bridge one stormy night after she'd called him in obvious distress, saying she'd discovered something terrible. The investigation concluded quickly, too quickly. Charles had always thought, but his demands for deeper inquiry were dismissed as a grieving husband's denial. The walls of his study told the story of a life dedicated to horses. Ribbons, trophies, and photographs chronicled the Harrison bloodline's rise to prominence in the racing world. But among these symbols of success, one photo held central place: Sarah astride Thunder, the black stallion she'd personally trained from a colt, the horse that now, mysteriously, guarded an unconscious boy in his stable. Victoria Mills, his housekeeper of 20 years, had tried to fill the domestic void after Sarah's death. She managed the household with military precision, but lately Charles had begun to question her growing influence. Her subtle manipulations, once dismissed as protective loyalty, now felt suffocating. She had become a shadow, always watching, always present, yet somehow distant from the warmth that had once filled these halls. Charles's fingers traced the edge of Sarah's last research journal, its pages filled with cryptic notes about local orphanages and suspicious adoptions. He'd found it hidden in her desk weeks after her death, but many pages were missing, torn out by unknown hands. The fragments that remained hinted at a darkness she'd uncovered, one that may have cost her life. The Harrison fortune, built on horses but diversified through Sarah's skilled investments, had made him one of Kentucky's wealthiest men. Yet tonight, watching rain slash against windows that had witnessed both triumph and tragedy, Charles felt the weight of mysteries unsolved and truths untold. The boy in his stable stirred memories he'd tried to bury of another stormy night, of Sarah's tears as she spoke of a child lost, of secrets she'd promised to explain but never had the chance. Thunder's unusual behavior nagged at him. The stallion, Sarah's last gift to him, had become nearly unapproachable after her death, refusing all riders and attacking any who entered his stall. Yet tonight he stood guard over a stranger, displaying a gentleness Charles had only ever seen him show to Sarah. But rising from his desk, Charles moved to a hidden wall safe, its contents known only to him. Inside lay a small wooden box containing a baby's hospital bracelet and a torn photograph, half an image of Sarah holding a newborn, its other half lost to time or intent. She had never explained these items, and he had never found the courage to demand answers. But now, with a mysterious boy lying in his stable, protected by Sarah's beloved horse, the time for answers had perhaps finally come. A knock at his study door interrupted his thoughts. Victoria stood in the doorway, her face a mask of concern that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Sir, about the boy in the stable. Perhaps we should call the authorities." Her suggestion, though reasonable, sent a chill down Charles's spine. Something told him that involving officials would be a terrible mistake. "No, Victoria," he said firmly, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. "The boy stays here, under my protection, until we understand what's happening." As thunder rolled outside, Charles couldn't shake the feeling that this night would change everything. Elizabeth Beth Harrison stood in her mother's garden, now wild and overgrown, her rebellious spirit reflected in her appearance. Designer clothes, deliberately distressed, honey blonde hair streaked with defiant purple, and green eyes that held both fire and unspoken pain. At 17, she bore the weight of loss like armor, using her sharp tongue and colder demeanor to keep the world at bay. The rain had stopped, leaving the garden heavy with moisture and memories. This had been her sanctuary with her mother, Sarah, where they would spend Sunday afternoons planting roses and sharing secrets. Now, a decade later, the once pristine beds had become a tangle of thorns and wild beauty, much like Beth herself. She refused to let Victoria's gardeners touch it. This chaos was hers to maintain or destroy. Inside the mansion, her report card lay unopened on her desk, straight A's hidden beneath a growing collection of disciplinary notices. Beth excelled academically without trying, but her behavior had become increasingly erratic since discovering a hidden collection of her mother's journals 3 months ago. The entries spoke of corruption, missing children, and dangerous discoveries, ending abruptly 3 days before her death. Her father's recent distance bothered her more than she admitted. Charles had always been her rock, but lately he seemed lost in his own investigation, spending hours in his study poring over old documents. Beth had caught glimpses of photographs, newspaper clippings, and letters, but he closed himself off whenever she tried to ask questions. Thunder's stall had become her hiding place, the only spot on the estate where Victoria couldn't corner her with disapproving looks and subtle criticisms. The massive black stallion, normally aggressive toward everyone else, allowed her to sit quietly in his presence. Sometimes she'd talk to him about her mother, about the growing certainty that Sarah's death wasn't an accident, about the fear that gnawed at her when she caught Victoria watching her with those calculating eyes. Beth's fingers traced the charm bracelet her mother had given her on her 7th birthday, just months before the accident. Each charm held a message, a secret meaning Sarah had promised to explain when Beth was older. "When you're ready to understand," she had said, hugging her daughter close. Now, a decade later, Beth wondered if those secrets had died with her mother, or if they were still waiting to be discovered. The sound of her father's voice from the stable drew her attention. He was speaking to someone in low, urgent tones. Curiosity overcame caution, and Beth crept closer, keeping to the shadows. Through the stable doors, she saw her father kneeling beside a boy about her age, his clothes torn and bloodied. But it was Thunder's behavior that stopped her cold. The horse was standing guard over the stranger, displaying a protectiveness she'd only seen in old videos of him with her mother. Something about the boy's face tugged at her memory, like a word caught on the tip of her tongue. She'd seen those features before but couldn't place where. As she watched her father tend to him, Beth felt an unexpected surge of jealousy, followed immediately by shame. She'd been alone with her grief for so long. The idea of sharing her father's attention with anyone else felt like a betrayal of her mother's memory. Victoria's voice cut through the night air, suggesting they call authorities. Beth tensed, recognizing the subtle manipulation in the housekeeper's tone, the same tone she'd used years ago when suggesting they clear out Sarah's belongings for Charles's sake. Something inside Beth hardened with resolve. Whatever was happening, Michael Anderson's earliest memories were of cold walls and colder hearts at St. Mary's Orphanage. At 16, his file contained more questions than answers. No birth records, no family history, just a handwritten note stating he was found abandoned at the church steps. But in his dreams he remembered warmth, the scent of roses, and a woman's gentle voice singing lullabies in the darkness. Life at St. Mary's had taught him to be invisible, to survive by watching and waiting. His dark brown eyes, remarkably similar to those of the black stallion that now stood guard over him, had seen too much for someone so young. The bruises hidden beneath his clothes told stories of disciplinary measures that went far beyond acceptable punishment, administered by staff who seemed to take special pleasure in tormenting him. Despite the hardships, Michael had managed to excel in his studies, sneaking books from the administrator's office to read by flashlight long after lights out. His mind was sharp, analytical, storing away details that others missed. He'd noticed the pattern of children disappearing in the night, the suspicious visits from well-dressed strangers, the way certain files vanished from the office after these disappearances. The breaking point had come when he discovered a hidden ledger in Father Thomas's office filled with names and prices. Among the entries he'd found his own name, marked with a strange symbol and a note Harrison connection hold. Before he could understand what it meant, he was caught. The beating that followed was meant to silence him forever, but somehow he'd found the strength to escape. Rain-soaked and bleeding, he'd run blindly through the storm until fate or fortune led him to Harrison Estate. The moment he'd locked eyes with Thunder, something deep within his soul had shifted. The horse's acceptance felt like recognition, as if they'd known each other in another life. For the first time in years, Michael felt safe. Now, drifting in and out of consciousness, he caught fragments of conversation around him. A man's voice, strong yet gentle, reminded him of dreams he'd long forgotten. A girl's voice, initially hostile but tinged with curiosity. And another woman's voice that sent chills down his spine, though he couldn't understand why. In his fevered state, memories began to surface: a garden filled with roses, a silver charm bracelet catching sunlight, a woman's face filled with tears as she held him close, whispering promises to find him again. These images had always felt more real than the orphanage's claim that he was abandoned, but he'd learned early that questioning the official story only led to pain. His fingers clutched a small object hidden in his pocket, a carved wooden horse he'd had for as long as he could remember. The bottom bore a single word, partially worn away. He'd spent countless nights tracing those letters, wondering if they held the key to his identity. Now, lying in the Harrison stable, that fragment suddenly felt significant. The pain in his ribs flared as he tried to move, reminding him of Father Thomas's final warning, "You'll never expose us." No one will believe a worthless orphan, but something about Charles Harrison's concerned face suggested otherwise. For the first time in his life, Michael dared to hope that he might have found not just safety, but answers to the questions that had haunted him since childhood. Thunder's gentle nickering brought him comfort as darkness crept back into his vision. The last thing he saw was Beth's face, studying him with a mixture of suspicion and recognition that mirrored his own confused feelings. Somewhere in his fading consciousness, Michael knew that his arrival at Harrison Estate was more than chance, it was destiny finally correcting a long-ago wrong. The dawn light crept across Harrison Estate as Charles made the decision that would change everything. Despite Victoria's increasingly urgent protests, he carefully lifted Michael's unconscious form from the stable floor. Thunder watched intently, following them to the stable door before reluctantly remaining behind, his eyes fixed on their retreating figures. "Mr. Harrison, please reconsider." Victoria's voice cut through the morning air, sharp with barely concealed anger. "We know nothing about this boy. He could be dangerous, a thief, or worse." She stood blocking the mansion's entrance, her usually perfectly maintained appearance showing signs of strain. "At least let me call the authorities first." Charles met her gaze steadily, something about her insistence setting off warning bells in his mind. "He's injured and needs immediate medical attention, Victoria. We can sort out the details later." His tone left no room for argument as he carried Michael past her, noting how the boy seemed to curl instinctively away from the housekeeper's presence, even in unconsciousness. The grand foyer of Harrison Mansion felt different that morning, as if the very air had shifted with Michael's arrival. Charles laid him gently on the antique sofa, watching as the boy's face contorted in pain. Blood had dried along his hairline and bruises were beginning to darken across his visible skin. These weren't injuries from a simple fall or fight, they spoke of systematic abuse. "Sir, at least let me call Dr. Peterson," Victoria persisted, hovering nearby with her phone already in hand. "He's always been discreet about such delicate matters." Something in her tone made Charles pause. He'd never questioned why Victoria always insisted on calling James Peterson instead of other local doctors, but now he wondered about the connection. "No," Charles said firmly, surprising both Victoria and himself. "I'm calling Dr. Sarah Mitchell." He saw Victoria's face tighten at the name. Dr. Mitchell was new to the area and had no connections to the local establishment. "In Victoria, please prepare the blue guest room, the one next to Beth's." Victoria's lips pressed into a thin line. "Sir, that room." It was Mrs. Harrison's study. "We haven't opened it since." She trailed off as Charles turned to face her fully. For the first time in years, he felt himself standing up to her subtle manipulations. "I'm well aware of what that room was, Victoria. Please have it ready within the hour." His voice was quiet, but held an authority that had been dormant since Sarah's death. As Victoria left, her steps unusually hurried, Charles turned back to Michael, noticing how the morning light illuminated his features in a hauntingly familiar way. Dr. Mitchell arrived quickly, her young face serious as she examined Michael's injuries. Her findings confirmed Charles's worst fears, evidence of long-term abuse, malnutrition, and recent severe trauma. "These injuries," she said quietly, pointing to distinctive marks on Michael's ribs, "they're not random. Someone wanted to hurt him specifically and knew exactly how to do it." As she worked, Michael briefly regained consciousness, his dark eyes focusing on Charles with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. "Please," he whispered, "don't send me back. They'll kill me if I go back." His hand clutched Charles's sleeve with surprising strength before he slipped under again. Charles felt something shift in his chest, a protective instinct he hadn't experienced since Beth was small. "No one's sending you anywhere," he promised, though Michael was no longer conscious to hear it. "You're safe now." The words felt right, despite the complexity they would surely bring. Throughout the morning, Charles noticed Victoria making numerous hushed phone calls from the garden, her agitation growing with each one. She didn't know he could see her from his study window, pacing and gesturing as she spoke. Her behavior confirmed his growing suspicion that Michael's appearance had disrupted something larger than a simple household routine. By noon, Michael was installed in the blue room, clean, treated, and resting peacefully for perhaps the first time in years. Charles stood in the doorway, watching the boy's chest rise and fall, trying to understand the profound sense of rightness he felt about protecting him. The room, untouched since Sarah's death, seemed to welcome its new occupant, as if it had been waiting all along. A soft sound behind him made Charles turn. Beth stood there, her face a complex mixture of emotions as she took in the scene. "Dad," she said quietly, "who is he?" Really, the question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Charles wished he had an answer, but all he could feel was the certainty that Michael's arrival was somehow connected to the mysteries Sarah had died trying to uncover. Beth's initial curiosity about Michael quickly transformed into cold fury as reality set in. Standing in her mother's former study, now converted into a bedroom for this stranger, she felt as if every change was erasing another piece of Sarah Harrison's existence. "You can't be serious," Dad. Beth's voice trembled with barely contained rage. This was Mum's room. Her books, her papers, her whole life was here, and you just gave it away to some random boy from the streets. She gestured wildly at the space, now rearranged to accommodate Michael's presence, though Charles had carefully preserved Sarah's books and personal items. "Beth, honey, your mother would have wanted," Charles began, but Beth cut him off sharply. "Don't tell me what Mom would have wanted." Her voice rose, causing Michael to stir uneasily in his sleep. "You have no idea what she would have wanted, because she's dead. She's dead. And you're trying to replace her memory with this stranger?" Victoria appeared in the doorway, a satisfied gleam in her eyes as she watched the scene unfold. "Miss Beth is right, sir. This room holds too many memories. Perhaps the servants' quarters would be more appropriate for our unexpected guest." Beth shot Victoria a venomous look, surprisingly annoyed by the housekeeper's interference despite agreeing with her conclusion. This was a family matter, and something about Victoria's eager participation felt wrong. As if sensing the tension, Michael's eyes fluttered open. His gaze met Beth's, and for a moment something passed between them, a flash of recognition that startled them both. Beth quickly masked her confusion with contempt. "Oh, look who's finally awake," she said coldly. "Tell us, what's your angle? Playing the beaten puppy to get into a wealthy home?" The words felt cruel, even as she spoke them, but she couldn't stop. "Did you research us? Figure the grieving widower would be an easy mark." Elizabeth Charles's sharp tone made her flinch. He rarely used her full name. "That's enough." Michael struggled to sit up, his face pale but dignified. "I don't want to cause any trouble," he said softly. "I can leave." "No," Charles said firmly, surprising everyone. "You're staying." Beth felt tears threatening and blinked them back furiously. "Fine, he can stay. But don't expect me to play happy family with your new charity case." She stormed toward the door, then turned back, her eyes blazing. "And if he touches anything of Mom's, I'll make him regret it." Later that evening, Beth found herself drawn back to the stables, seeking comfort from Thunder as she always did when upset. To her shock, she found Michael there, standing calmly beside the usually aggressive stallion, his hand gently stroking the horse's neck. "Get away from him," she shouted, fear for the horse's safety overriding her desire to avoid Michael. "Thunder doesn't let anyone near him. He'll hurt you." But Thunder remained peaceful, even seeming to protect Michael, much like he had done with Sarah. The similarity hit Beth like a physical blow, adding to her confusion and anger. "He's special," Michael said quietly, not moving away from the horse. "He understands pain, like he knows what it's like to lose someone you love." The simple observation, so close to Beth's own thoughts about Thunder, shook her deeply. "You don't know anything about loss," she spat, but her voice wavered. Michael turned to face her fully, and in the stable's dim light, something about his features tugged at her memory again. "I know enough," he replied, his voice gentle despite her hostility. "I know what it's like to have questions that no one will answer, to feel like there's a truth just out of reach." Beth felt her carefully constructed walls tremble. This boy who had invaded her home, taken over her mother's space, seemed to understand things he couldn't possibly know. It made her both angry and afraid. "Stay away from me," she warned, backing away. "Stay away from Thunder, stay away from my father, just. Stay away." She fled the stable, but not before seeing the hurt in Michael's eyes, hurt that mirrored her own. In her room that night, Beth pulled out her mother's journal, the one she'd found hidden behind the stable's loose board. As she flipped through the familiar pages, a photograph fell out, one she'd never noticed before. It showed her mother, years younger, holding a baby that wasn't Beth. On the back, in Sarah's elegant handwriting, was a date and 2 words that made Beth's blood run cold. The truth about Michael's past began to emerge 3 days after his arrival, piece by horrifying piece. Dr. Mitchell's detailed examination revealed a history written in scars, systematic abuse spanning years, not random accidents as saint. Mary's records claimed. The discovery came during a routine check of his healing wounds, when Michael's fever-induced delirium broke down the walls he'd built around his memories. "Please, not the basement again," he mumbled, thrashing weakly against imagined restraints. "I won't tell anyone about the ledger. Please." Father Thomas's voice cracked with terror, making Dr. Mitchell pause in her examination. Charles, who had refused to leave Michael's side during these episodes, felt his heart constrict at the raw fear in the boy's voice. The basement was their favorite place, Michael continued, lost in his nightmare. No windows. No one can hear you scream. His eyes snapped open suddenly, focusing on Charles with devastating clarity. "They sold them, you know. The pretty ones, the smart ones. They had prices like cattle at auction." Dr. Mitchell carefully documented every word, her professional demeanor cracking slightly as Michael described the systematic abuse at St. Mary's. Children disappearing in the night, never to be seen again. Files mysteriously vanishing. Staff members who asked too many questions meeting with accidents. "There was a woman," Michael whispered, his voice becoming clearer. "She would come at night, looking at us through the bars, always writing in her little black book. Victoria, they called her. She chose which ones would disappear." Charles felt the blood drain from his face. "Victoria, his Victoria?" Before he could process this revelation, Michael continued, each word adding to the horrifying picture. "But they wouldn't sell me. Father Thomas said I was special, had to be kept until she gave the order. They hurt me to keep me quiet, but they wouldn't let me disappear like the others." His hand clutched at something beneath his shirt, a small wooden horse pendant that Charles had noticed earlier. Dr. Mitchell gently asked about the pendant, and Michael's fingers tightened around it protectively. "I've always had it. It's the only thing I have from before. There's a word carved on the bottom, but it's worn away. Just Ha remains." Charles felt his world tilt sideways. With trembling fingers, he pulled out his phone and showed Michael a photograph, one he'd kept hidden in his safe for years. It showed Sarah, much younger, holding a baby boy. In the image, an identical wooden horse pendant hung from a delicate chain around her neck. Michael's eyes widened in recognition. His fingers traced the image, lingering on Sarah's face. "I dream about her sometimes," he whispered. "She's singing to me in a garden full of roses. I always thought it was just a dream." The door creaked behind them, and they turned to find Beth standing there, her face pale. In her hands she held their mother's journal, open to a page that had been partially torn out. The remaining fragment contained a desperate entry. "They took him. Victoria helped them take my baby boy. Charles can never know they'll kill him if he discovers the truth. I have to find proof, have to save my son before they sell him like the others. If anything happens to me, the proof is in the... The rest was torn away, but at the bottom of the page, in shaking handwriting, was a final note. My darling Michael, if you ever find your way home, look for the horse. I'll always... Beth's voice trembled as she spoke. Mom's last words in the hospital, she wasn't delirious, was she? She was trying to tell us about him. About Michael. The silence that followed was deafening. Outside the window, Thunder's distinct whinny could be heard, the same protective sound he'd made only for Sarah. Now it seemed he was making it for her long-lost son. Michael sat up straighter, strength seeming to flow into him with each revelation. The ledger, he said urgently. The one I found in Father Thomas's office. It had names, dates, prices, and my name was marked with a special symbol. Next to it was written Harrison Connection Hold. Charles felt decades of fog lifting from his mind. Sarah's mysterious behavior before her death, her frantic research into local orphanages, her final desperate phone call about discovering something terrible, it all suddenly made horrible sense. What none of them noticed was Victoria's shadow retreating from the doorway, or the hurried phone call she made moments later. It's happening. They know. Initiate the contingency plan immediately. Victoria Mills orchestrated her campaign against Michael with the precision of a master chess player. The morning after the revelations about his connection to the Harrisons, she began planting seeds of doubt throughout the household with surgical accuracy. Her first target was the domestic staff, gathering them in the kitchen before dawn. I know we all want to believe in fairy tales, she said softly, stirring her tea with calculated deliberation. But think about it, a mysterious boy appears, bears a convenient resemblance to our beloved Mrs. Harrison, and suddenly claims to be her long-lost son. It's the oldest con in the book. She paused, letting her words sink in. And Mr. Harrison, still grieving after all these years, is too vulnerable to see it. The staff exchanged uneasy glances. They'd all loved Sarah Harrison, and the idea of someone exploiting her memory struck a nerve. Victoria watched their expressions shift, noting with satisfaction how the gardener's sympathy for Michael began to curdle into suspicion. Next, she moved on to the Harrison family's social circle. Phone calls were made, each carefully worded to sound concerned rather than malicious. I hate to worry you, but I fear Charles is being taken advantage of. Yes, this boy is very convincing. Oh, you heard about similar scams in the next county? How interesting. By noon, rumors were circulating through Kentucky's highest social circles. The prestigious Harrison family, already scarred by tragedy, was now allegedly falling prey to a cunning young con artist. Victoria made sure each whisper carried just enough truth to sound plausible, while casting Michael in an increasingly sinister light. But her masterpiece was the anonymous letter she arranged to have delivered to the local newspaper. It detailed concerns about human trafficking connections to St. Mary's Orphanage, but twisted to implicate Michael as part of the criminal network rather than a victim. The article would take days to appear, but Victoria knew timing was everything. Mrs. Mills, one of the maids, approached her nervously. The boy Michael, he was in Mrs. Harrison's study earlier, going through her old desk drawers. I thought you should know. Victoria's face transformed into a mask of grave concern. Did you see what he took, she asked, knowing full well she'd planted Sarah's missing jewelry box there herself the night before. The maid's negative response was perfect. Suggestion was often more damaging than evidence. She saved her most delicate manipulation for Beth. Finding the teenager in the garden, Victoria approached with practiced sympathy. Miss Beth, your mother would be heartbroken to see her precious things being poured through by a stranger. I saw him earlier, you know, handling her favorite necklace, the one she always said would be yours. Beth's face hardened, but Victoria caught the flicker of doubt in her eyes. Despite the girl's recent warming toward Michael, the suggestion that he might be disrespecting Sarah's memory struck deep. Charles proved more challenging. His instinctive trust in Michael remained strong, But Victoria had prepared for this. She arranged for Dr. Peterson to drop by casually, bringing carefully doctored records from his contacts at other orphanages. Charles, old friend Peterson, said gravely, "I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but this boy has quite a history of similar claims. 3 other wealthy families in the past 2 years, all grieving losses, all taken in by remarkably similar stories." Victoria watched from the doorway as Charles examined the fabricated documents, noting how his shoulders tensed. The seeds of doubt were planted, even if they hadn't yet taken root. What Victoria didn't notice was Thunder's increasingly agitated behavior whenever she approached the stable. The horse's instincts, which had always sensed Sarah's true feelings, now seemed attuned to the housekeeper's underlying malice. She also missed the way Dr. Mitchell observed her machinations with growing suspicion, quietly documenting inconsistencies in Victoria's behavior and statements. The young doctor had begun her own investigation, connecting dots that Victoria thought she'd erased years ago. Most crucially, Victoria underestimated the power of blood ties. Despite her best efforts, Charles couldn't shake the profound sense of recognition he felt when looking at Michael. Every time doubt began to take hold, he would catch a gesture, a look, or a phrase that was purely Sarah, moments that no con artist could fake. As darkness fell that evening, Victoria made one final call from the privacy of her rooms. "Everything is proceeding as planned," she reported. "But we need to accelerate the timeline. The boy remembers too much, and that Mitchell woman is asking questions." "Yes, I understand. It will be handled tonight." She hung up and moved to her window, watching Michael's silhouette in the stable with Thunder. Her lip curled slightly. Soon, very soon, all her careful work would pay off. Sarah's secret would remain buried, and the fortune she'd worked so long to claim would finally be within reach. The remarkable bond between Michael and Thunder became impossible to ignore as tensions rose within the Harrison household. In the stable's sanctuary, away from Victoria's watchful eyes, the massive black stallion displayed a gentleness with Michael that defied explanation. It was more than the usual connection between horse and human. It was as if Thunder recognized something in the boy that others couldn't see. Late one evening, Beth secretly observed their interaction from the hayloft. She watched as Michael approached Thunder's stall, speaking in the same soft, melodic tone that Sarah had once used. "You knew her, didn't you?" he whispered to the horse. "You remember her too?" Thunder pressed his velvet muzzle against Michael's palm, nickering softly in a way Beth hadn't heard since her mother's death. But it was what happened next that left Beth breathless. Michael began humming a lullaby, the same haunting melody Sarah had sung to Thunder during storms. It was a tune Beth had never shared with anyone, yet here was this stranger humming it perfectly. Thunder's reaction was immediate and extraordinary. The stallion's usual nervous energy calmed completely, his eyes half closing in what looked remarkably like recognition. Charles, drawn by the sound, stood transfixed in the stable doorway. The scene before him was a mirror image of countless evenings with Sarah. Michael's posture, the way his fingers gently stroked Thunder's neck, even the slight tilt of his head, all were pure Sarah. The resemblance was so striking that Charles had to grip the doorframe for support. "Nobody taught me the song," Michael said without turning, somehow sensing their presence. "I've just always known it. In the orphanage, on the worst nights, I'd hum it to myself and feel safe, like someone was watching over me." Thunder shifted restlessly as Victoria approached the stable, her heels clicking sharply on the cobblestones. The stallion's ears flattened, and he positioned himself protectively between Michael and the door. It was the same defensive posture he'd taken whenever Victoria had approached Sarah in the months before her death. "The horse remembers," Dr. Mitchell noted quietly, having arrived to check on Michael's healing wounds. "Animals often sense things we miss. Their instincts aren't clouded by pretense or social niceties." Her pointed glance at Victoria didn't go unnoticed. That afternoon, something extraordinary happened. Michael was helping clean Thunder's stall when the horse became agitated, pawing at a specific spot in the corner. Curious, Michael investigated, finding a loose floorboard. Hidden beneath it was an old leather journal, its pages warped with age but still readable. Sarah's elegant handwriting filled the pages, and tucked inside was a photograph that made Michael's hands shake. The image showed Sarah astride Thunder, one hand resting protectively over her pregnant belly. On the back was written, "My two boys, one beneath my heart, one beneath my saddle," both equally precious. The date matched Michael's birth. Thunder's discovery of the hidden journal seemed more than coincidence. The horse had been Sarah's confidant, watching her hide her secrets, keeping them safe until the right moment. Now, he was helping her son uncover the truth, piece by piece. Later that night, when a sudden storm rolled in, Thunder's behavior revealed another layer of their connection. The stallion grew increasingly anxious as Thunder crashed overhead, not from fear of the storm, but from something else. His agitation peaked just before Victoria's accident was scheduled to occur. Michael, drawn by some inexplicable instinct, rushed to the stable just in time to prevent a fallen electrical wire from connecting with the puddle near Thunder's stall. The wire's position was too precise to be accidental, the timing too convenient. Thunder's warning had saved both their lives. "He's not just a horse," Michael explained to Beth afterward, both of them seeking shelter from the rain in the stable. "He's a link to her, to our mother. Every time I'm with him, it's like pieces of my memory come back. Things I shouldn't know but somehow do." Beth watched as Thunder gently nuzzled Michael's shoulder, offering comfort. The horse's eyes held an intelligence that seemed almost human, as if he understood exactly what was at stake. "Mom used to say Thunder could see into people's souls," Beth admitted softly. She said he knew things we didn't. As if confirming her words, Thunder moved to stand between them and the stable door, his posture alert and protective. Moments later, they heard Victoria's voice outside, speaking in hushed tones about plans that were meant to remain hidden. The horse's instincts had once again proven unnervingly accurate. The first attempt on Michael's life came disguised as a tragic accident, carefully orchestrated during the Harrison Estate's annual charity gala. Victoria had insisted on holding the event, despite recent tensions, knowing it would provide the perfect cover. With dozens of wealthy guests milling about, security stretched thin and attention divided, the stage was set for what she planned to appear as a terrible misfortune. Michael had been reluctant to attend the gala, but Charles insisted, wanting to present a united front against the growing whispers in their social circle. Dressed in a borrowed suit that made him look startlingly like a young Charles, Michael stood uncomfortably at the edge of the grand ballroom, watching the elite of Kentucky society drift past in their evening finery. "Try this." Victoria appeared suddenly beside him, offering a crystal glass of what she claimed was sparkling cider. "You look like you could use some refreshment." Her smile didn't reach her eyes as she pressed the glass into his hand. But before Michael could drink, Thunder's frantic whinnying pierced the evening air, so urgent that Michael instinctively set the glass down untouched. Dr. Mitchell, passing by, noticed Victoria's flash of irritation. Casually, she picked up the abandoned glass, pretending to admire its crystal pattern. "I think I'll have this tested," she said quietly, meeting Victoria's gaze with steady determination. "Just out of professional curiosity." The housekeeper's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something dark and dangerous beneath, but before she could respond, screams erupted from the garden. The antique chandelier, which had hung securely for generations, had somehow broken free from its mounting exactly where Michael had been standing moments before Thunder's warning had drawn him away. Glass shattered across the terrace, the heavy bronze frame embedded in the marble where it fell. Victoria's performance was flawless as she rushed to express her shock and concern. "Thank goodness you moved when you did. It's miraculous, almost as if you knew." Her voice trailed off suggestively, planting seeds of suspicion even in this moment of apparent danger. But Beth had seen something others missed. Just before the chandelier fell, she'd spotted someone slipping out of the upstairs study, someone wearing the distinctive uniform of the maintenance staff, but moving with Victoria's characteristic precision. The pieces were beginning to fall into place, forming a pattern too deliberate to be coincidence. Charles, his face pale with the realization of how close they'd come to tragedy, pulled Michael close. "From now on, you stay within sight," he ordered, his voice shaking slightly. "No wandering off, no being alone." The protective gesture stirred something in Michael's memory, a similar embrace, a woman's voice making the same urgent demand for his safety. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the broken glass had been cleared away, Dr. Mitchell appeared at Charles's study door. Her expression was grave as she placed a laboratory report on his desk. "The glass Michael almost drank from," she said quietly. "It contained enough poison to stop his heart within minutes. Professional grade, nearly undetectable. The kind of thing only someone with medical connections could obtain." Thunder remained agitated throughout the night, refusing to settle until Michael came to the stable. The horse's stall had become the safest place on the estate, the one space Victoria seemed unable to fully control. As Michael leaned against the sturdy wooden door, Beth joined him, her party dress replaced by riding clothes. "I found something in Mom's old records," she whispered, pulling out a faded envelope. "Guest lists from parties 10 years ago. Victoria's name is there, but not as staff. She was a guest, connected to some medical charity. Everything about her past here is a lie." Michael felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "She knew your mother before. Then why?" "Because Mom discovered something," Beth continued, her voice barely audible. "Something about Victoria's connection to missing children. The charity was a front, that's what Mom wrote in her last journal entry. She was going to expose them all, but then..." The implications hung heavy in the darkness. Victoria hadn't simply appeared after Sarah's death to help the grieving family. She'd been placed there, tasked with ensuring Sarah's investigation died with her. Now, with Michael's appearance threatening to unravel everything, she was showing her true colors. Thunder's soft nickering drew their attention. The horse was pushing something through the stall bars, a scrap of paper that had been hidden in his blanket. Beth unfolded it with trembling fingers, recognizing her mother's handwriting. "If you're reading this, I'm already gone. Trust Thunder. He knows. The proof is where the roses meet the rain." The cryptic message made little sense, but one thing was clear: Sarah Harrison had known she was in danger and had left a trail of breadcrumbs for her children to follow. The question was, could they uncover the truth before Victoria's next attempt succeeded? The breakthrough came at dawn, 3 days after the chandelier incident. Beth had taken to spending her early mornings in her mother's rose garden, drawn by the cryptic message about roses and rain. As she traced her fingers along the weathered stone wall that bordered the garden, a loose brick shifted under her touch. Inside the small cavity, protected by a waterproof pouch, lay a USB drive and a letter in her mother's handwriting. "My dearest Beth." The letter began, "If you're reading this, then my worst fears have come true. The evidence on this drive proves what I suspected. Victoria Wells, she calls herself Mills now, isn't just a housekeeper. She's the architect of a devastating scheme involving St. Mary's Orphanage and dozens of wealthy families across the country." Beth's hands trembled as she continued reading. Sarah had uncovered a network that specialized in creating orphans, stealing infants from vulnerable mothers, falsifying deaths, then selling the children to wealthy families desperate for heirs. But Michael's case was different. He was Sarah's own son, taken not for profit but for leverage. "Your brother," Sarah wrote, "was born before I married your father. Victoria knew my secret and used it to force me into silence. She threatened to destroy Charles's reputation, to take you away, to harm Michael if I didn't cooperate. But I've been gathering evidence, preparing for the day when I could finally bring them all to justice." The sound of footsteps made Beth quickly hide the letter, but not before memorizing the final lines. The complete evidence is hidden where Thunder first showed his true heart. Victoria never knew about that day, about the storm that changed everything. Victoria emerged from the morning mist, her face a mask of concern. "Miss Beth, you're up early." Having trouble sleeping, her solicitor's tone couldn't quite hide the sharpness in her eyes as they darted around the garden. "Just missing Mom," Beth replied, forcing casualness into her voice. The roses helped me feel close to her. She noticed how Victoria's gaze lingered on the wall and realized with a chill that the housekeeper was searching for something. Throughout the day, Beth observed Victoria with new awareness. The housekeeper's phone calls, once dismissed as household management, now took on sinister significance. Each time Victoria spoke with Dr. Peterson, Beth caught fragments of coded conversations about shipments and special orders. In the afternoon, while Victoria was occupied with contractors repairing the chandelier, Beth slipped into the housekeeper's private quarters. Years of watching her mother conduct her secret investigation had taught Beth how to search thoroughly without leaving traces. In a locked drawer, she found what she was looking for: a small black notebook filled with names, dates, and amounts. But it was the photographs that made her blood run cold. Victoria, younger but unmistakable, standing beside Sarah at a charity gala. In another, Victoria wore a doctor's coat, her name tag reading Dr. Victoria Wells, St. Mary's Medical Center. And most damning of all, a picture of an infant Michael, clearly marked with the price and the notation Harrison Leverage secured. Beth photographed everything with trembling hands, her mind racing. The Victoria they knew, the efficient, loyal housekeeper who had helped them through Sarah's death, was a carefully constructed fiction. The real Victoria Wells was something far more dangerous. Thunder's agitated whinnying drew Beth to the window. Below, she saw Michael in the stable yard, with Victoria standing too close, speaking too intently. Even from a distance, Beth could see her brother's discomfort, the way he instinctively angled away from the housekeeper. Thunder paced in his stall, reflecting the tension of the scene. A memory surfaced: Sarah teaching 4-year-old Beth to ride, with Thunder watching protectively. "Remember, sweetheart," she had said, "horses see the truth in people's hearts. If Thunder doesn't trust someone, neither should you." Beth's fingers brushed against the USB drive in her pocket. Whatever evidence her mother had gathered, it had cost Sarah her life. Now, with Michael's life in danger, Beth faced the same choice her mother had: stay silent and safe, or risk everything for the truth. The decision crystallized as she watched Victoria reach out to touch Michael's face in a mockery of maternal concern. Her brother flinched, and in that small gesture, Beth saw echoes of all the children Victoria had hurt, all the families she had destroyed. "I'll finish what you started," Mum, Beth whispered, clutching Sarah's letter. "I'll protect Michael," exposed Victoria, "and make sure justice is finally served." She didn't realize she had spoken aloud until she heard a floorboard creak behind her. "Oh, Miss Beth," Victoria's voice came softly from the doorway. "You're so much like your mother, always getting involved in things that don't concern you." The door closed with a quiet click, and Beth realized with horror that in her focus on Catherine, Dr. James Peterson's carefully constructed facade began to crumble during an unexpected confrontation at Harrison Estate. He had arrived for what he claimed was a routine check on Michael's recovery, but Dr. Mitchell's presence changed everything. She stood in Charles's study, armed with documents that connected Peterson to a series of suspicious infant deaths at hospitals across 3 states. "Interesting pattern," Dr. Peterson, Mitchell said, spreading photographs across Charles's desk. "Every hospital where you worked experienced a spike in stillbirths among wealthy, unmarried mothers. Yet those same babies somehow ended up in private adoptions arranged through St. Mary's orphanage." Peterson's normally smooth demeanor cracked. "You're out of your depth, Dr. Mitchell. Some matters are better left uninvestigated." His hand trembled slightly as he reached for his medical bag, but Mitchell blocked his path. "Charles, watching the exchange, saw something flicker in Peterson's eyes, a darkness that had always been there, hidden behind years of friendly smiles and country club memberships. "How long, James?" he asked quietly. "How long have you been part of this?" The older doctor's laugh was bitter. "Part of it? Charles, I created it. 30 years ago I saw an opportunity. Desperate young mothers, wealthy families unable to conceive, all it took was the right connections and a willingness to blur certain ethical lines." Ethical lines, Mitchell's voice dripped with contempt. "You stole babies from their mothers, faked death certificates, and sold children like commodities. Those aren't blurred lines, Dr. Peterson. They're crimes." Peterson's composure slipped further. "You have no idea what good we did. Those children went to better homes, better lives. Ask Victoria, she understands. She was one of our first successes after all." The revelation hit Charles like a physical blow. "Victoria? What do you mean?" "Oh, she never told you Peterson's smile was cruel now. Your precious housekeeper was one of our earliest acquisitions, taken from a drug-addicted mother, placed with a wealthy family. When that family tired of her, we repurposed her. She became our most valuable asset." Thunder's urgent whinnying interrupted the confrontation. Through the study window, they could see Beth struggling with Victoria near the stables, the USB drive falling from her hand. "Ah," Peterson sighed. "It seems Victoria has found your daughter's unfortunate discovery. Such a shame. Sarah's evidence was quite thorough. It's what got her killed, you know." Charles lunged across the desk, but Peterson was surprisingly quick. The medical bag fell, spilling its contents, including a loaded syringe. "Insurance," he explained, backing toward the door. "Victoria insisted I bring it, in case Michael proved difficult." Dr. Mitchell moved to block his escape, but Peterson grabbed her arm, pressing the needle against her neck. "Now, let's be reasonable. This can end one of two ways. Either I walk out of here and we all forget this unpleasant conversation, or—" The choice was taken from him as Michael appeared in the doorway, holding what appeared to be Sarah's missing journal. "Or you can explain why your signature is on my falsified death certificate," he said quietly. "The one that declared me stillborn 16 years ago." Peterson's face went ash white. The journal, Sarah's real journal, not the altered version they had planted, contained every detail of his involvement. "Where did you get that?" "Mom hid it," Michael replied, his voice stronger now. "Thunder showed me where. He remembers everything, Dr. Peterson. Every baby you stole, every mother you deceived. Animals see what humans miss, isn't that right?" The sound of police sirens pierced the air. Dr. Mitchell had managed to send a silent alarm through her phone, which she'd kept recording in her pocket throughout the confrontation. "It's over," James Charles said, advancing slowly. "Sarah's evidence, Beth's discoveries, Michael's testimony, it's all coming out now." Peterson's professional mask shattered completely. "You don't understand. We had a system. Order. We gave those children better lives than they could have ever had with their birth families. Victoria and I, we created something perfect." "Perfect," Michael's laugh was bitter. "Is that what you call beating children into silence? Selling them to the highest bidder? Murdering my mother when she tried to expose you?" The sirens grew closer, and Peterson's desperation peaked. He lunged toward Michael with the syringe, but years of abuse had taught the boy quick reflexes. He sidestepped, and Peterson crashed into Charles's desk. The syringe plunged into his own arm as he fell. As Peterson began to lose consciousness, his last words were chilling Victoria. "Contingency plan." The roses, then his eyes rolled back, leaving them with a new fear. What final act of revenge had he and Victoria planned? While police secured Peterson's unconscious form, Charles led Michael and Beth to Sarah's private study, a hidden room behind the library's false wall that even Victoria didn't know existed. Here, surrounded by a decade's worth of research, Charles finally uncovered the full scope of his late wife's investigation. "Sarah knew she was running out of time," Charles explained, pulling out folders marked with dates leading up to her death. She created this room after discovering Michael's existence. Everything here, every document, every photograph tells the story of how deep this conspiracy runs. The walls were covered with photographs and newspaper clippings connected by red strings. At the center was a large map marking orphanages across the country, all connected to St. Mary's. Sarah had traced money transfers, adoption records, and death certificates, building a case that implicated some of the most prominent families in Kentucky. "Look at this," Beth breathed, pulling out a leather-bound journal. Mom kept tracking Victoria even after she came to work here. She knew Victoria was planted in our home, but she played along to gather evidence. The journal entries revealed Sarah's torment watching her stolen son grow up in an orphanage while her enemy lived under her roof. Michael studied a series of photographs showing Victoria at various society events over the decades. In each image, she appeared differently, sometimes as medical staff, sometimes as a social worker, but always near pregnant women or young mothers. "She was hunting," he said quietly. "Finding targets for Peterson's scheme." Charles found a sealed envelope addressed to him, dated the day before Sarah's death. Inside was a letter that made his hands shake. "My darling Charles, if you're reading this, they've silenced me, but they couldn't stop me from leaving a trail. Our son lives. The proof is in Thunder's stable. The loose floorboard where I used to hide sugar cubes. Victoria never understood why that horse trusted only me. Now you know he was protecting more than just treats." Thunder's unusual behavior suddenly made sense. The horse hadn't just been Sarah's faithful companion, he had been her confidant, watching her hide evidence piece by piece. His immediate acceptance of Michael wasn't just recognition, it was loyalty to a promise made to Sarah. A hidden compartment in Sarah's desk revealed medical records proving Michael's birth, along with DNA test results confirming his identity. Sarah had managed to obtain samples from both Charles and Michael without anyone knowing, building an ironclad case for their relationship. "She never stopped fighting for you," Charles told Michael, his voice rough with emotion. "Even when she couldn't acknowledge you openly, she was working to bring you home." Beth discovered a series of coded ledgers detailing payments between St. Mary's and various shell companies. Mom was following the money. Every baby Victoria and Peterson stole generated thousands in adoption fees. It was a multi-million-dollar operation. But the most damning evidence was a video recording Sarah had made just hours before her death. In it, she detailed everything: the trafficking ring, Victoria's true identity, Peterson's involvement, and most importantly, the location of backup copies of all her evidence. "I've hidden copies with trusted friends," Sarah's image explained, her face determined despite her obvious fear. "If anything happens to me, they'll know what to do. Victoria thinks she's won, but she doesn't understand a mother's love. My children will find each other, and when they do, this whole corrupt system will crumble." Charles watched his wife's final message with tears streaming down his face. She knew they were coming for her that night. The car accident wasn't an accident at all. A series of photographs showed Victoria meeting with shady figures in the weeks before Sarah's death. The final image was particularly chilling: Victoria standing over Sarah's car the day before the accident, apparently tampering with the brake lines. "We have enough here to bring them all down," Beth said fiercely. Mom made sure of it. But why did Victoria wait so long to move against Michael? Why not kill him years ago? The answer lay in Sarah's final journal entry: Victoria keeps Michael alive as insurance. As long as he lives, she controls the potential heir to the Harrison fortune. But if Charles ever discovered the truth, Michael would become a liability. "I pray I can protect them all, but if I fail, I've left a path for my children to follow. The truth will come out, and love will win over evil." Thunder's urgent whinnying interrupted their discovery. Through the study window, they saw Victoria approaching the stable with determined strides, something glinting in her hand. The final confrontation was about to begin. Victoria's endgame unfolded like a meticulously choreographed dance of destruction. As police sirens wailed in the distance, responding to Dr. Mitchell's alert about Peterson, Victoria initiated a plan years in the making. She had already disabled the estate's security systems and sealed all but one exit, creating a deadly maze that would end at Thunder's stable. How fitting, she announced, her voice carrying across the stable yard, that it should end where it began. Sarah always did love these stables. The elegant housekeeper facade had vanished entirely, replaced by something harder, colder. In her hand she held a remote detonator, and strapped to Thunder's stall were enough explosives to destroy half the estate. "You see, Charles," she continued, watching them emerge from the house, "Sarah's death was meant to be the end of it. Such a tragic accident, a grieving husband, a traumatized daughter, a faithful housekeeper to pick up the pieces, perfect closure. But she just couldn't let it go. Could she? Had to leave her little breadcrumbs, her precious evidence." Michael moved instinctively toward Thunder, but Victoria's laugh stopped him. "One more step, and I'll trigger it now. The blast radius includes the entire stable. Your precious horse won't survive, and neither will you." Thunder's agitated whinnying echoed through the yard, but unusually the horse wasn't focused on Victoria. His gaze was fixed on something behind her, something approaching through the gathering dusk. "It was never about the money, was it?" Charles asked, drawing Victoria's attention. "All these years, watching you pinch pennies, clip coupons, that was just another act. This was about Sarah, about what she had that you wanted." Victoria's composure cracked slightly. What she had everything. The perfect life, the devoted husband, the beautiful daughter. She threw away her first child, and still, life rewarded her. Do you know what it's like to be discarded? Charles? To be a replacement child for wealthy parents who sent you back when their real daughter got better. Beth gasped as understanding dawned. "That's why you took Michael. Not just for leverage, for revenge. Mom was going to expose your past, reveal that you were one of the trafficked babies yourself." "Clever girl," Victoria sneered. "Yes, Peterson saved me from a worthless mother and gave me to a wealthy family. When they tired of their replacement daughter, he taught me everything he knew. Sarah's pregnancy was my first solo project, convincing her that giving up her baby was the only way to protect her future. Her perfect life was built on that sacrifice, and she dared to judge me." Thunder's stall door began to rattle, the horse's agitation growing more intense. Victoria glanced nervously at the animal, then back at her hostages. "But now it all ends. Peterson's arrested? Fine. I have offshore accounts, new identities prepared. But first I'll finish what I started 10 years ago. Sarah's precious family, her beloved horse, all her secrets up in flames." What Victoria didn't notice was Dr. Mitchell silently approaching from behind, having circled through the woods during the confrontation. The young doctor had military training, a fact not listed in her public credentials, and moved with practiced stealth. "The police are 4 minutes out," Mitchell called suddenly, making Victoria spin around. "Drop the detonator or I'll drop you." Victoria's laugh was almost maniacal. "You think I'm afraid of prison? Everything I've built, everyone who trusted me, it's all gone anyway. But I can still win. I can still make Sarah lose everything, even from beyond the grave." As she raised the detonator, several things happened simultaneously. Thunder kicked his stall door with explosive force, spraying splinters of wood. Michael dove forward, driven by some instinct he didn't understand. Beth screamed a warning. And Charles, moving with speed he hadn't shown in years, tackled Victoria from the side. The detonator flew from Victoria's hand, arcing through the air in what seemed like slow motion. Dr. Mitchell lunged for it, but the device hit the ground and skittered under Thunder's stall. The horse, somehow understanding the danger, backed away from the small black box. "No," Victoria's shriek was desperate as she fought against Charles's grip. "You don't understand. The secondary trigger, it's on a timer. 2 minutes. then it all burns. Michael was already moving, dropping to his stomach to reach under the stall. His fingers brushed the detonator just as Thunder's hoof came down, crushing the device with surgical precision. The horse had destroyed the trigger without setting off the explosives, a feat that seemed impossible, yet somehow perfect. Victoria's collapse was total. As police cars flooded the estate's driveway, she began to laugh, a broken, hollow sound. She wins again. Sarah always wins. Even dead, she's stronger than me. No, Beth said quietly, helping her father secure Victoria's hands. Mom didn't win because she was stronger. She won because she loved more than she hated. That's something you never understood. As police officers led Victoria away, they found a final surprise in her pocket, a worn photograph of her as a child, standing beside her replacement family. On the back was written Victoria Wells, adoption completed. The date matched one in Sarah's records, proving the final link in the trafficking chain. Thunder nickered softly, drawing Michael to his stall. The horse's intelligent eyes seemed to hold a message, a mixture of relief, triumph, and something else, something that felt like his mother's love, watching over them all. Beth's transformation from Michael's fiercest opponent to his most dedicated protector crystallized in the aftermath of Victoria's arrest. As police combed through the estate gathering evidence, Beth found herself standing in her mother's rose garden, the weight of her previous behavior toward Michael crushing her heart. "I was so wrong," she whispered, tears streaming down her face as Michael approached cautiously. "All those cruel things I said, the way I treated you, I was protecting Mom's memory by hurting her son. What kind of daughter does that make me?" Michael's response surprised them both. He reached out and took her hand, his touch gentle despite all the pain she'd caused. "You were protecting the only family you knew. Mom would understand that." It was the first time he'd referred to Sarah as Mom aloud, and the word hung between them like a bridge being built. "But I should have seen it," Beth insisted, gesturing to their joined hands. "Look at us, we have the same hands, the same way of tilting our head when we're thinking. Even the way you say certain words, it's pure Mom. How did I miss it?" Thunder watched from his nearby paddock as the siblings began to truly see each other. Beth found herself sharing stories of their mother, little details that filled in the gaps of Michael's lost childhood. She always hummed when she was thinking deeply, Beth remembered. The same melody you were humming in the stable that day. "I remember that tune," Michael said softly. "In my earliest memories someone was singing it. I used to think I'd imagined it, but it was her, wasn't it? She found ways to reach me even when she couldn't keep me." Beth led him to a hidden corner of the garden, where a small stone bench sat beneath an arch of climbing roses. This was her favorite spot. She'd sit here for hours writing in her journals. "I used to think she was just gardening, but now I know she was documenting everything, fighting to bring you home." As they sat together on their mother's bench, Beth pulled out a small velvet box. "I found this in her jewelry box years ago. I never understood why she kept it. Inside was a tiny silver baby shoe charm, inscribed with a date, Michael's birth date. She had it made for you, even though she couldn't acknowledge you. She wore it on a long chain, hidden under her clothes, keeping you close to her heart." Michael touched the charm with trembling fingers, and Beth saw in his face the same vulnerability she'd ignored before. Her protective instincts, once focused on excluding him, now flared with a fierce desire to shield him from further harm. "Things will be different now," she promised, clasping the charm around his neck. "No one will ever hurt you again. Not Victoria, not the orphanage, no one. You're my brother, and I protect my family." The transformation in Beth became even more apparent when the media descended on Harrison Estate, hungry for details about the trafficking ring. Reporters attempted to ambush Michael, shouting questions about his years of abuse. Beth stepped in front of him, her voice ringing with authority. "My brother has survived things none of you can imagine," she declared. "He's not your headline. He's not your tragic story. He's a Harrison, And if any of you try to exploit his pain for ratings, you'll learn exactly how fiercely this family protects its own. In the quiet moments between police interviews and family discussions, Beth and Michael began building the relationship they should have had all along. She taught him to ride, properly this time, sharing their mother's techniques. He showed her how to find peace in Thunder's presence, the way Sarah had once done. Their father watched this transformation with profound gratitude, seeing Sarah's greatest wish fulfilled as their children not only found each other but truly became siblings. The bond between them grew stronger each day, built on shared memories of their mother and a determination to honor her sacrifice. Mum knew this would happen, Beth said one evening as they sat together in the stable. She knew that someday we'd find each other, that the truth would come out. That's why she left so many clues, not just to expose Victoria, but to give us a path to become a family. Thunder approached the siblings, gently nudging them both with his nose. Beth laughed softly. Even Thunder knew before I did. He accepted you instantly because he recognized Mum in you. I was the slow one, too blinded by fear and grief to see what was right in front of me. Michael smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes, something that had been rare before. Maybe we needed to go through all of it to get here. The distrust, the anger, the fear, it makes this mean more somehow. Well, Big Sister mode is fully activated now, Beth declared, throwing an arm around his shoulders. So get used to being annoyingly protected and embarrassingly fussed over. It's my job to make up for all the years we lost. The final confrontation with Victoria's network came without warning, testing Charles's devotion to his newfound son in ways he never imagined. It began on a quiet Sunday afternoon, as the family was finally beginning to heal from Victoria's betrayal. The estate's security system had been upgraded, but no one anticipated the desperation of those who stood to lose everything if the trafficking ring was fully exposed. 3 black SUVs breached the estate's gates, carrying men who had once been Victoria's elite clients, powerful figures who couldn't risk their involvement becoming public. They came armed not just with weapons, but with documents that could destroy the Harrison family's reputation and business if released. Charles was in the stable with Michael, sharing stories about Sarah, when Thunder's warning whinny alerted them to the danger. Through the stable windows they saw the intruders approaching, their intentions clear in their determined strides and concealed weapons. "Michael, listen carefully," Charles whispered urgently, pushing his son toward Thunder's stall. "Take him and ride. There's a hidden trail behind the north paddock. Your mother used it to exercise him. Get Beth and go." "I won't leave you," Michael protested, but Charles's expression stopped him. "I lost you once," Charles said firmly. "I lost your mother. I won't lose you again. Every moment from now on is a gift Sarah fought to give you. Don't waste it." The stable doors burst open, and Charles stepped forward to face the intruders, physically placing himself between them and his son. "Gentlemen," he said calmly, "I believe you're trespassing." The leader, a distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit, smiled coldly. "Mr. Harrison, let's be reasonable. The boy knows too much. His testimony could implicate dozens of prominent families. Surely you understand the need for discretion." "What I understand," Charles replied, slowly backing toward Thunder's stall where Michael was preparing the horse, "is that you're threatening my son. That's not something I'll tolerate." "Your son?" the man laughed. "A convenient story. We have proof that Michael Anderson is a con artist, part of a scheme to defraud wealthy families. One signature from you declaring him an imposter, and this all goes away. Otherwise." He gestured, and his men raised their weapons. Charles's response was immediate and unexpected. He charged forward, tackling the nearest gunman. The distraction gave Michael the crucial seconds needed to mount Thunder and crash through the stable's rear door, but a shot rang out in the chaos. Charles felt the bullet's impact but remained standing, his only thought protecting his children's escape. He could hear Thunder's hooves thundering away, carrying Michael to safety, and fought through the pain to keep the intruders occupied. Beth, alerted by the gunshot, had already called the police and was recording everything from her hidden position in the hayloft. She watched in horror as her father, bleeding but defiant, faced down the men who had come to silence them. "You're too late," Charles told them, his voice strong despite his injury. "The evidence isn't just here, it's everywhere." Sarah made sure of that. Every bank transaction, every forged document, every criminal connection. "It's all being released to the media right now." The leader's composure cracked. "You're bluffing." Victoria assured us all evidence was contained. Charles smiled, Sarah's strength flowing through him. "My wife outsmarted Victoria for years. Did you really think she'd leave our son's future to chance? It's over. The only question is how many more charges you want to add to your inevitable indictments." Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. The intruders began to panic, their careful plan dissolving. The leader raised his weapon again, but Charles wasn't afraid. He could see Michael and Thunder circling back, Beth now riding beside them on her own horse, and knew his sacrifice had bought them the time they needed. As police cars flooded the estate, Charles finally allowed himself to collapse, the adrenaline fading. Michael and Beth reached him first, their faces streaked with tears but alive, safe, together everything he and Sarah had fought for. "Dad," Michael choked out, the word feeling both new and perfectly natural, "you can't leave us. Not now. Not when we're finally a family." Charles gripped his children's hands, feeling Sarah's presence strongly in that moment. "I'm not going anywhere," he promised through the pain. "Your mother waited too long for this day. I intend to be here to see her dreams for our family fulfilled." Thunder stood guard over them as paramedics arrived, the horse's protective stance a mirror of Charles's own dedication. In those tense moments, as medical personnel worked to stabilize him, Charles saw his wife's wisdom in everything: the horse she'd trained, the children she protected, the truth she'd preserved at the cost of her own life. The emergency room at Kentucky General Hospital erupted into controlled chaos as Charles Harrison was rushed through its doors. His vital signs were crashing, the bullet having caused more damage than initially apparent. Beth and Michael ran alongside the gurney until hospital staff forced them to stop at the trauma room doors. BP dropping, possible internal bleeding, a nurse called out as doctors swarmed around Charles. Through the small window in the door, his children watched helplessly as their father fought for his life. The pristine white of the hospital sheets made the growing bloodstains seem even more alarming. "This is my fault," Michael whispered, his face ashen. "If I had never come to Harrison Estate, if I had just stayed," lost. His voice broke as Beth gripped his hand tightly. "Don't you dare," she hissed, though her own voice trembled. "Dad made his choice. Mom made her choice. They chose you, they chose us, because that's what parents do. They protect their children." Dr. Mitchell arrived, still wearing the clothes she'd worn during the confrontation at the estate, now stained with Charles's blood from her initial emergency care. Her expression was grave as she studied the medical charts. "The bullet fragmented," she explained quietly. "It's causing damage to multiple organs. They're preparing him for emergency surgery," but she hesitated, her professional demeanor cracking slightly. "You should prepare yourselves. The next few hours will be critical." Inside the trauma room, Charles briefly regained consciousness. His eyes found his children through the window, and he smiled weakly, mouthing words they couldn't hear. A monitor began screaming, and hospital staff rushed to respond. "He's crashing," someone shouted. "Get them 2 or 1 now." As they wheeled Charles toward surgery, Beth and Michael caught a glimpse of their father's face. Despite his pain, he looked peaceful, almost serene, the same expression Sarah had worn in her final photograph, as if knowing her sacrifice would ultimately protect her children. Thunder's distressed whinnying could be heard from the hospital parking lot, where the police had been forced to contain him after he'd followed the ambulance. The horse's devotion to the Harrison family seemed to transcend normal animal behavior. as if he understood the gravity of what was happening. Hours passed in the sterile waiting room. Beth paced restlessly while Michael sat motionless, his father's blood still staining his shirt. Neither spoke much, but their shared fear created a bond stronger than words. Occasionally, medical staff would hurry past, their expressions carefully neutral, offering no clue to Charles's condition. Dr. Mitchell emerged from the OR several times, her updates becoming increasingly concerning. "The damage is extensive," she reported. "His heart has stopped twice, but they've managed to revive him. He's fighting, but—" The unspoken words hung heavy in the air. Local news vans began gathering outside the hospital as word spread about the shooting at Harrison Estate. The story of the trafficking ring, Victoria's arrest, and the attempt on Charles's life had broken wide open. Reporters tried to get statements from Beth and Michael, but hospital security kept them at bay. Late into the night, a new complication arose. The surgical team discovered that the bullet fragments had nicked Charles's aorta, causing slow but steady bleeding. The surgery that could repair it might kill him, but without it he would certainly die. "We need next of kin to make a decision," the surgeon told them. "Quickly." Beth and Michael looked at each other, the weight of the choice crushing them. How could they decide whether to risk losing their father immediately or watch him slip away slowly? "What would Mom do?" Michael asked softly, looking to his sister for guidance. Beth closed her eyes, remembering Sarah's strength, her unwavering dedication to protecting her family no matter the cost. When she opened them, there were tears on her cheeks, but determination in her voice. "She'd tell them to fight," Beth said firmly. "Like she fought, like Dad fought. We're Harrisons, we don't give up." As they signed the consent forms, a strange calm settled over them both. Whatever happened next, they would face it together, as the family Sarah and Charles had sacrificed everything to protect. While Charles fought for his life in surgery, Victoria demanded to speak with Beth and Michael from her holding cell at the county jail. Against their lawyer's advice, they went, seeking answers that only she could provide. The interview room was stark and cold, but Victoria's demeanor had changed dramatically. Gone was the calculating housekeeper, replaced by a woman who seemed to have aged decades overnight. "You deserve to know the whole truth," Victoria began, her voice hoarse. "About your mother, about Michael, about everything. Sarah's death wasn't just about silencing her investigation, it was personal. She was my sister." The revelation hit Beth and Michael like a physical blow. "That's impossible," Beth whispered. "Mom was an only child." Victoria's laugh was bitter. "That's what the adoption records show. But Sarah and I shared the same birth mother. When she was adopted by the Fairchilds, I was sent to an orphanage. I spent years watching my sister live the perfect life while I bounced between foster homes. When Peterson found me, gave me purpose. I finally had the power to make her feel what I felt, the pain of losing a child." Michael leaned forward, his hands shaking. "So when Mom got pregnant—" "I made sure I was there," Victoria confirmed. "The perfect confidante for a scared young woman. I convinced her that giving you up was the only way to protect her future, her reputation. But instead of breaking her, it made her stronger. She married Charles, had Beth, built a beautiful life, and then she started looking for you." Tears streaked down Victoria's face. "She figured it out, found adoption records that proved we were sisters. She came to me the night before she died, offering forgiveness, offering to help me heal. Said we could be a real family, that she'd help me find peace." Beth's voice was barely audible. "But you couldn't accept that, could you?" "Peace," Victoria spat the word. "I didn't want peace. I wanted her to suffer like I had suffered. When she threatened to expose everything, it wasn't just about the trafficking ring. She was going to reveal my true identity, show everyone what I'd done to my own sister, my own nephew." Michael stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the concrete floor. "You killed your sister because she offered you love instead of revenge." Victoria's composure cracked completely. I tampered with her brakes, watched her car go over that bridge. But she won anyway, didn't she? She left all those clues, all that evidence. Even in death, she made sure you'd find each other, made sure I'd face justice for everything I'd done. The charm bracelet, Beth realized suddenly. Each charm wasn't just a message, they were locations. Places you'd hidden children, places where evidence could be found. Clever Sarah Victoria nodded. She knew I'd never understand the significance. Love was a language I couldn't speak. That's why Thunder never trusted me. Animals sense that kind of emptiness. A guard appeared, signaling the end of their time, but Victoria had one final revelation. There's something else you should know. The night Sarah died, she left a letter for Charles in Thunder's stable behind the loose board where she hid her most important evidence. A letter I stole before anyone could find it. From her prison jumpsuit, Victoria withdrew a weathered envelope, its seal unbroken. I couldn't bring myself to destroy it, but I couldn't bear to read it either. Maybe now it's time she had the last word. Beth took the letter with trembling hands. Through the thin paper, Sarah's handwriting was visible, a final message to her husband, preserved for 10 years by the very person who had taken her life. As they left the jail, Michael and Beth sat in their car, staring at the envelope that contained their mother's last words. Thunder's distinct whinny could be heard from the horse trailer where he'd insisted on following them, as if he too was waiting to hear Sarah's final message. "Should we open it?" Michael asked softly. Beth clutched the envelope to her chest. "Not yet. Not until Dad can hear it too. Mom would want us all together for this." The siblings drove back to the hospital in silence, each lost in thoughts of their mother, the woman who had loved so fiercely that even death couldn't stop her from protecting her family, and the sister whose heart had been so twisted by bitterness that she'd destroyed the very love she craved. Dr. James Peterson's final act of betrayal unfolded in the sterile corridors of Kentucky General Hospital while Charles fought for his life in surgery. Despite being under arrest, he had managed to convince the authorities to let him assist with Charles's operation, citing his expertise in trauma surgery and his long history as the Harrison family physician. "I know his medical history better than anyone," Peterson had argued persuasively. "You need me in there if you want him to survive." What no one realized was that the doctor had one last deadly card to play. Dr. Mitchell, watching from the observation deck above the operating room, was the first to notice something wrong. Peterson's movements weren't focused on helping, they were calculated to cause maximum damage while appearing to attempt rescue. "His hands," she whispered, suddenly understanding. "He's not trying to stop the bleeding, he's making it worse." But before she could alert the surgical team, Peterson had already administered what he claimed was a standard coagulant. Blood pressure dropping rapidly, a nurse called out, "He's crashing." Peterson stepped back, a subtle smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "It must be a reaction to the medication," he said smoothly. "Some patients are unfortunately sensitive to standard treatments." But Dr. Mitchell was already rushing into the OR, test results in hand. "It's not a coagulant," she announced. "I had the syringe he prepared tested. It's designed to prevent clotting. He's trying to make Charles bleed out." The surgical team sprang into action, working desperately to counteract the drug Peterson had administered. Security guards seized the doctor, but his face showed no remorse, only a cold satisfaction. "Victoria, and I protected them for years," Peterson spat as he was dragged away. "All those wealthy families, their precious reputations. Charles's death would have been our final gift to them, silencing the last witness who could expose everything." Through the observation window, Beth and Michael watched in horror as the medical team fought to save their father. Thunder's agitated whinnying could be heard even through the hospital walls, as if the horse sensed the danger to Charles. "Why?" Michael demanded, confronting Peterson as he was led past them in handcuffs. "Haven't you taken enough from our family?" Peterson's response was chilling. "You don't understand. This was never just about money. It was about power, the power to reshape lives, to decide who deserves to be happy. Your mother challenged that power. Charles would have exposed it. Some secrets are worth killing to protect. Dr. Mitchell emerged from the OR, her surgical gown stained with Charles's blood. We've stabilized him, but the next few hours are critical. Peterson's drug did significant damage. We're giving him transfusions, but... She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. He needs something more than just medicine now. He needs a reason to fight. Beth and Michael exchanged glances, then Michael spoke softly. The letter. Mom's last words. Maybe that's what Dad needs to hear. Together, they approached Charles's bedside in the ICU. Despite the tubes and monitors surrounding him, their father looked peaceful. Beth carefully opened the weathered envelope, and Michael held their father's hand as she began to read Sarah's final message aloud. "My dearest Charles," she read, her voice trembling. "If you're reading this, then the worst has happened. But don't mourn me too deeply. Everything I did was to protect our children, all of our children. Michael is out there, carrying pieces of both of us in his heart. Find him. Love him. Help him and Beth heal each other. Our family isn't broken. It's just waiting to be whole again." As Sarah's words filled the room, the monitors showing Charles's vital signs began to strengthen. It was as if his wife's final message was calling him back, giving him the strength to continue fighting. Outside the window, Thunder stood in the hospital garden, where the police had finally allowed him to stay, his head raised toward Charles's room. The horse's presence seemed to embody Sarah's enduring protection, standing guard over her family one last time. The full scope of Victoria's identity unraveled in the days following Peterson's failed attempt on Charles's life. As FBI agents combed through decades of records, a story more twisted than anyone imagined came to light. Victoria hadn't just been Sarah's sister, she had been her twin, separated at birth through Peterson's earliest trafficking scheme. The evidence was found in a hidden safe behind Victoria's bedroom wall: birth certificates, adoption papers, and a photograph of two infant girls, identical in every way. On the back, in faded ink, was written Sarah and Victoria Wells, born July 15, 1970. Separated August 1, 1970. She watched her sister her entire life, FBI agent Roberts explained to Beth and Michael in the hospital waiting room. While Sarah was adopted by the wealthy Fairchild family, Victoria was sold to a series of foster homes. Each time a family decided they didn't want her, Peterson would move her to another placement, grooming her to become part of his organization. Medical records revealed the psychological torture Victoria had endured. Each new family had tried to mold her into their perfect daughter, and each rejection had deepened her wounds. When she discovered her twin sister's existence at 16, something in her broke completely. "Look at these," Beth whispered, spreading out childhood photographs of Sarah alongside surveillance photos Victoria had taken. They could have been the same person. No wonder Thunder always seemed uneasy around her. He sensed the uncanny resemblance to Mum. The most damning evidence came from Victoria's personal diary, discovered hidden in Thunder's stable, the last place anyone would think to look, given the horse's obvious distrust of her. The entries revealed a mind twisted by envy and pain. "Sarah has everything I should have had. The perfect family, the perfect life. She doesn't deserve it. When she got pregnant, I knew I had my chance. Take her child like mine was taken, make her feel what I felt. But she was stronger than me. Even in giving up her baby. She never broke. She just loved more fiercely, fought more determinedly." Michael read the words with tears streaming down his face. She didn't just want to hurt Mom. She wanted to become her. That's why she took the housekeeper position. After Mom died, she was trying to replace her completely. The diary's final entry, dated the day before Sarah's death, revealed the ultimate tragedy. "My sister offered me forgiveness today. Said we could heal together, be a real family. She didn't understand. I don't want forgiveness. I want what was stolen from me. If I can't have the life that should have been mine, then she doesn't get to have it either. As Charles slowly recovered, the FBI uncovered more connections. Victoria had used her resemblance to Sarah to access private records, manipulate accounts, and maintain the trafficking network's facade of legitimacy. Her signature, when compared to Sarah's, was nearly identical, a skill she'd practiced for years. The ultimate irony, Agent Roberts noted, is that Sarah spent years investigating the trafficking ring, never knowing she was its first victim. Victoria and Peterson didn't just steal children, they stole Sarah's chance to know her own sister, twisted a bond that should have been sacred. Thunder, still maintaining his vigil in the hospital garden, seemed to understand as the truth emerged. His aggressive behavior toward Victoria hadn't just been protecting the Harrisons, it had been a reaction to her fundamental wrongness, an impostor wearing his beloved Sarah's face. The final confirmation of Michael's identity came through an unexpected source, Thunder's stable wall. As FBI agents conducted their thorough search of the estate, they discovered a hidden compartment behind the horse's favorite stall, sealed with a combination lock that matched Sarah's birth date. Inside, preserved in a waterproof case, lay the irrefutable proof of Michael's parentage, original birth certificates, DNA test results Sarah had secretly obtained, and a series of photographs documenting her pregnancy. Most touching was a letter written by Sarah to her unborn son, dated just days before his birth. "My precious boy, if you're reading this, then somehow you've found your way home. Victoria forced me to give you up by threatening to destroy Charles's life and any chance of us having a future together. But know this, not a day has passed that I haven't thought of you, searched for you, loved you. Thunder knows. He's been keeping these secrets safe until you were ready to find them." The DNA results, when compared with new tests, were conclusive. Michael wasn't just Sarah's son, he was Charles's as well. Sarah had discovered she was pregnant shortly after meeting Charles, but before they were married. Victoria had used this knowledge to manipulate her, convincing her that Charles would reject them both if he knew. She played on every fear Sarah had written. Said Charles would never accept a child from a previous relationship, that his family would disown him, that his business would suffer. In my panic, I believed her. It was only later I realized she had orchestrated everything, creating the very situation she claimed to be protecting me from. Most heartbreaking were the small mementos. Sarah had preserved a tiny hospital bracelet, a lock of baby hair, the first and only photograph she'd managed to take of her newborn son before Victoria whisked him away. On the back of the photo, Sarah had written, "My darling Michael, born 4:17 a.m., the exact time Thunder always grows restless in his stall. Even he keeps vigil for you." Charles, now strong enough to sit up in his hospital bed, held these treasures with trembling hands. "I remember that morning," he whispered. Sarah was distant for weeks afterward. If I had only known, if I had just asked the right questions. The stable wall had yielded one final secret, a recorded conversation between Sarah and Victoria, captured on a small device hidden among the rafters. In it, Victoria revealed her true role in separating mother and son. "You think you can just reclaim him?" Victoria's voice dripped with venom. "He's been placed with one of our finest families. Oh wait, they rejected him, just like every family rejected me. So now he rots in that orphanage, feeling the same worthlessness I felt. Poetic, isn't it?" Sarah's response was filled with a mother's determination. "You're wrong, Victoria. Love isn't about worth or status or revenge. It's about choice. Every day I choose to love my son, to fight for him, to believe we'll be reunited. And when we are, your whole corrupt world will crumble." The recording ended with sounds of a struggle, dated the day before Sarah's death. She had known the danger she faced, but chose to stand her ground, protecting her family until the end. Thunder's role in preserving these secrets became clear. Sarah had trained him to guard that specific stall, knowing Victoria would never dare get close enough to discover its hidden compartment. The horse had carried out his mission faithfully for over a decade, waiting for the day Michael would return. As the evidence mounted, Michael spent hours in Thunder's stable, processing the truth of his identity. The horse seemed to understand, offering the same gentle comfort he had once given Sarah. In those quiet moments, surrounded by proof of his mother's endless love and determination, Michael finally felt the last pieces of his fractured identity falling into place. The full extent of Victoria and Peterson's trafficking operation emerged like a dark web spreading across decades of carefully falsified documents. FBI agents discovered a sophisticated network involving corrupt officials, compromised adoption agencies, and some of the country's most prominent families. The evidence Sarah had gathered, combined with files found in Victoria's hidden safe, painted a picture of systematic exploitation that spanned generations. Peterson's medical files revealed his methodology targeting vulnerable pregnant women, particularly those from wealthy families with reputations to protect. Victoria would then step in as a counselor, convincing these women that giving up their babies was the only way to preserve their social standing. The children would be declared stillborn, complete with falsified death certificates bearing Peterson's signature, only to resurface in private adoptions to the highest bidders. The financial records are staggering, Agent Roberts explained, spreading documents across Charles's hospital room. Each baby sold for anywhere between $500,000 to $2 million, depending on the child's characteristics and the desperation of the buying family. Victoria and Peterson amassed a fortune exceeding $100 million over 30 years. Most disturbing were the coded ledgers detailing what they called inventory management. Children were categorized by physical features, intelligence, and family background. Those deemed most valuable were placed with wealthy families, while others, like Michael, were kept in orphanages as leverage against their birth parents. "Look at this," Beth said, her voice shaking as she examined a file. They kept recording Mom's visits to St. Mary's. Every time she came close to finding Michael, they'd move him to a different facility. They were toying with her, watching her suffer. The investigation uncovered connections to missing children cases across multiple states. Sarah's meticulous research had identified pattern spikes in stillbirth rates wherever Peterson practiced, followed by clusters of private adoptions handled through shell companies Victoria controlled. Thunder's stable yielded another crucial piece of evidence. Sarah had hidden a USB drive in the horse's favorite grooming brush, containing recordings of conversations between Victoria and various wealthy clients. The discussions were explicit about prices, preferences, and the understanding that these transactions would never be traced. She was building a case that would expose everyone involved, Agent Roberts noted. Not just Victoria and Peterson, but judges who approved fraudulent adoptions, officials who overlooked irregularities, families who knowingly purchased children. It's no wonder they silenced her. The most damning evidence came from Victoria's own records. She had documented everything, perhaps as insurance against her clients, or out of some twisted need to commemorate her achievements. Each transaction was recorded with clinical precision, including photographs of the children, their birth parents, and their buying families. Michael found his own file among the records. It contained not just his birth certificate and adoption papers, but detailed notes about Sarah's every attempt to find him. Victoria had derived particular pleasure from documenting her sister's futile searches, her growing desperation, her refusal to give up hope. "She turned my life into a weapon against Mom," Michael said quietly, reading through the file. "Every time Mom got close, every time she almost found me, Victoria was there, watching, enjoying her pain." The investigation expanded to include prominent figures in medicine, law, and politics. Many of the children, now adults, came forward with their stories, creating a wave of revelations that shook the foundations of several powerful families. Thunder, seemingly aware of his role in preserving the evidence, stood proudly in his stable as FBI agents photographed and documented the hiding places Sarah had created. The horse had been more than just a beloved pet. He had been a guardian of truth, protecting Sarah's legacy until justice could finally be served. As the full scope of the trafficking ring became public, Charles watched from his hospital bed as news reports detailed arrests across the country. Sarah's years of careful investigation, combined with Victoria's compulsive record-keeping, had created an airtight case that would ensure no one involved would escape justice. Spring arrived at Harrison Estate with a sense of renewal that seemed to heal not just the land, but the family itself. Charles, fully recovered from his injuries, stood in Sarah's rose garden watching his children work together to restore their mother's beloved flowers. The morning sun caught the silver charm bracelet on Beth's wrist, the one that had held so many of Sarah's clues now shared between sister and brother as a symbol of their bond. Thunder grazed peacefully nearby, his coat gleaming in the sunlight. The horse had become even more protective of the family since the truth emerged, as if knowing his mission to guard Sarah's secrets was finally complete. He raised his head occasionally to check on Michael, their connection growing stronger with each passing day. "Mum would love this," Beth said softly, carefully pruning a white rose bush, Sarah's favorite. Seeing her garden come back to life, her family whole again, she glanced at Michael, who was installing a new trellis for the climbing roses, seeing her children together. Michael paused in his work, wiping sweat from his brow with a gesture so like Sarah's that it made Charles's heart ache. "I feel her here," he admitted. "Not just in memories or photographs, but in everything the roses, thunder, the way the morning light hits the stable. It's like she never really left." Charles approached his children, placing a hand on each of their shoulders. The past months had transformed them all. Beth's sharp edges had softened into protective strength, while Michael's haunted looks had given way to quiet confidence. Together, they had become exactly what Sarah had fought so hard to protect, a family bound by love stronger than any tragedy. "Your mother knew this day would come," Charles said, pulling out a newly discovered letter, the last one they had found hidden in Thunder's stable. "She wrote this the morning before she died, after confronting Victoria. Listen." He unfolded the paper carefully, and Sarah's voice seemed to fill the garden through her written words. "My darling family, if you're reading this, then the truth has finally come to light. Beth, my fierce protector. Thank you for being strong enough to open your heart to the brother you didn't know you had. Michael, my precious lost boy, know that every day away from you was a day spent fighting to bring you home. Charles, my love, forgive yourself. You didn't fail us. You gave our children the strength to find each other." Thunder approached as Charles read, gently nuzzling each family member in turn. The horse had been Sarah's confidant, her protector, and now stood as a living link between past and present, keeping her memory alive in his own unique way. "She knew," Beth whispered, tears falling freely. "Even at the end, she knew we'd find our way back to each other." Michael reached for his sister's hand, their matching charm bracelets catching the light. "Not just back to each other," he corrected gently. "Forward, together. That's what Mom wanted, not just reunion, but renewal." Charles watched his children embrace, seeing in them all the best parts of Sarah, her strength, her compassion, her unfailing love. The garden bloomed around them, white roses opening to the morning sun, as if Sarah herself was blessing this new beginning. Justice arrived with the changing seasons. Victoria and Peterson's trial became a landmark case that exposed decades of corruption and forced society to confront uncomfortable truths about privilege, power, and the commodification of children. The courthouse steps were crowded with families reunited through Sarah's evidence, each story a testament to her determination to right a profound wrong. Beth and Michael sat together in the front row throughout the proceedings, their presence a silent accusation that neither Victoria nor Peterson could escape. Charles joined them when his strength allowed, his quiet dignity adding weight to the prosecution's case. Victoria's final testimony proved devastating. Face to face with the family she had tried to destroy, her carefully constructed facade crumbled completely. "I wanted to be Sarah," she confessed, her voice breaking. "Not just to have what she had, but to be her, to have her grace, her capacity for love. The more I failed, the more I hated her for succeeding." The evidence Sarah had gathered proved irrefutable. Bank records, medical files, correspondence between conspirators, everything she had hidden throughout Harrison estate created a chain of proof that could not be broken. Thunder's stable alone had yielded enough documentation to guarantee convictions. The defendant Victoria Wells, the judge announced to a hushed courtroom, is hereby sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole for the murder of Sarah Harrison and crimes against countless families. As Victoria was led away, she turned one last time toward Michael, seeing in him the perfect blend of Sarah and Charles, everything she had tried and failed to destroy. Dr. Peterson received multiple life sentences, one for each family he had torn apart. His medical license was permanently revoked, and his assets were seized to create a foundation supporting reunited families and preventing future trafficking schemes. But the true victory came in the aftermath. Dozens of children, now adults, found their way back to their birth families. Sarah's detailed records helped piece together histories that had been deliberately shattered, healing wounds that had festered for generations. Harrison Estate became a sanctuary for these reunions. Charles opened the grounds to families meeting for the first time, finding that helping others heal helped his own family grow stronger. Thunder seemed to take special pride in these gatherings, greeting each new arrival with gentle dignity, as if channeling Sarah's welcoming spirit. "Mom knew this would happen," Beth said one evening, watching a tearful reunion unfold near the Rose Garden. "She didn't just save us, she saved everyone Victoria and Peterson had hurt. Her love was bigger than just our family." Michael nodded, absently touching the small wooden horse pendant he now wore openly. "She turned her pain into purpose," he said quietly. "Instead of letting them break her, she used everything they did to build something stronger." In the end, justice came not through vengeance but through healing and the power of a mother's love. Sarah's final victory wasn't just in the courtroom verdicts or the exposed conspiracies, it was in the families made whole, the bonds restored, and the legacy of love that triumphed over decades of calculated cruelty. Thunder's watchful presence remained a constant reminder of Sarah's protection, his steady gaze seeming to say that while justice had been served, their journey together was far from over. The Harrison family had emerged from darkness not just reunited, but transformed, ready to help others find their way home, just as Sarah had always intended. 1 year after Victoria's conviction, Harrison Estate bloomed with new purpose. The sprawling property, once a symbol of wealth and privilege, had been transformed into the Sarah Harrison Foundation for Family Reunification. The stables that had protected so many secrets now housed a therapeutic riding program, with Thunder serving as its gentle ambassador. Charles stood on the mansion's terrace, watching Michael lead a riding lesson for a group of recently reunited families. His son moved with Sarah's natural grace, sharing her gift for healing wounded souls through connection with horses. Beth worked alongside him, her protective instincts now channeled into supporting other siblings finding their way back to each other. "Mom would love this," Beth said, joining her father at the railing. "The estate feels alive again, filled with the kind of love she always wanted to share." She gestured toward the Rose Garden, where memory plaques now honored each family reunited through Sarah's evidence. The white roses she'd loved so much bloomed year-round now, as if blessed by her enduring spirit. Thunder had become something of a legend among the families who came to heal at Harrison Estate. The horse seemed to have an uncanny ability to sense which visitors needed him most, offering the same steady comfort he'd once given Sarah. His stall, where so many crucial pieces of evidence had been hidden, was now a place of honor, marked with a simple plaque: "Here truth found sanctuary, and love kept watch." Michael's work with traumatized children showed particular promise. Drawing from his own experiences, he developed programs combining equine therapy with family counseling, helping others process the complex emotions of reunion and recovery. "Every child deserves to know they're worth searching for," he often said, echoing Sarah's own determination. The Harrison siblings had established a scholarship program for children of trafficking survivors, ensuring that education and opportunity would help break the cycles of vulnerability that Victoria and Peterson had exploited. Each recipient received a small silver horse charm, a reminder that hope, like Thunder's vigilant protection, never abandoned its post. Charles continued preserving Sarah's legacy through legal reform, working with lawmakers to strengthen adoption regulations and protect vulnerable families. The Foundation's advocacy led to the Sarah's Law, requiring unprecedented transparency in adoption proceedings and establishing strict oversight of private adoption agencies. On quiet evenings, the family still gathered in the Rose Garden, sharing memories and plans for the Foundation's future. Thunder would graze nearby, his presence a constant reminder of the faithful love that had helped truth prevail. The horse was aging now, but his eyes remained bright and alert, still standing guard over the family he'd helped reunite. It's strange Michael reflected one such evening how something so broken could become so beautiful. Mom's love didn't just save us, it created this ripple effect of healing that keeps growing. Beth smiled, touching her charm bracelet, now a symbol of hope for so many. That's what real love does, she said softly. It transforms pain into purpose, loss into legacy. Charles watched his children with quiet pride, seeing in them the perfect blend of Sarah's compassion and their own hard-won wisdom. The estate that Victoria had tried to poison with bitterness had instead become a wellspring of healing, proving that love, as Sarah had always believed, was the strongest force for change. Thunder's gentle nickering echoed across the garden, calling them home as the sun set on another day of healing at Harrison Estate. Sarah's spirit lived on not just in memories or monuments, but in every family reunited, every wound healed, every truth finally spoken in the light of love. Thank you for experiencing this emotional journey with us. If this story touched your heart, we would be deeply grateful if you could take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments below. What moments moved you the most? Which character's journey resonated with you? Please consider subscribing to our channel to support our team's dedication to bringing you more powerful stories of love, redemption, and family bonds. Every like, share, and subscription helps us continue creating meaningful content that touches souls and inspires hearts. Share this video with your loved ones. Perhaps they too will find hope and healing in this tale of unconditional love and the triumph of truth over darkness. Your support means the world to us. Together, let's spread more stories that remind us of the power of family and love.